That said, it is a big pleasure for me and an honor to introduce you to our first panel of the meeting. We will be talking about Jewish literature in the Spanish-speaking world, and it's a pleasure to have four very distinguished presenters. I would like to start by presenting Aurelio Major. Aurelio is a poet, translator, and editor. He directed publishing projects alongside Octavio Paz and co-founded Granta in Español together with Valerie Miles. Aurelio translates prominent English language authors like Susan Sontag and Elliot Wavenger into Spanish. He's currently a professor at the Pompeu Fabra University in Barcelona and recently translated Peter Skoll's poetry of Kabbalah. Valerie Miles is a writer, editor, and translator originally from the United States and based in Barcelona. She co-founded Granta en Español, together with Aurelio, directed international publishing for Alfaguara, and translates authors like Rafael Chirves and Enrique Villamatas. Valerie also serves as a literary advisor for the Prado Museum and teaches literary translation and creative writing at the Pompeu Fabra University. David Aliaga is a writer and editor from Barcelona, recognized by Granta as one of the best young Spanish language authors. His books include La lengua herida and El año nuevo de los árboles, and his stories have been translated into several languages. David specialized in exploring contemporary Jewish identity in literature and comics. Finally, we have Paul Sánchez Keighley. Paul Sánchez is a translator and journalist specialized in Israel and the Middle East. His work appears in media like La Vanguardia, Haaretz, or the Jerusalem Post. Paul has translated works by Edgar Queret into Catalan. He also manages Sefer, Barcelona's annual Jewish literary festival, and co-hosts the podcast Alayam. He's also involved in promoting Jewish culture in Barcelona through the Mosaica Association. It is a real pleasure to have you here. Thank you very much for coming with us and attending. It's wonderful. I think, Paul, you will start by presenting a little bit your work in Sefer. Thank you very much.
Hey, thank you, Fede, for the introduction. Thank you all for being here. So, to kick off, I'm just briefly going to give an introduction about Sefer before we launch into the panel discussion proper. Sefer is the annual Barcelona Jewish Book Festival, which happened for the first time in 2015, and it was created by Mosaica, this cultural association, which Fede mentioned in the introduction, to which I and David also belong. A lot of the people here are involved in some capacity in Mosaica. And the first ever Sefer was before Mosaica even had its headquarters in the current Casa Adret, the historic building in the Jewish quarter where it's currently based. Since then, we have had 8 editions year on year, including during COVID, when the Sefer Festival was held online. And last year there was not a Sefer. It was the first year we did not do one, but this year we are now launching it again. So every year it takes place at around autumn, late October, early November. This October we're going to have a new Sefer Festival. It's going to be the 9th edition of its kind. And we're also innovating the format this year by introducing a mini spring festival, slightly inspired by the Peralada Opera Festival, which also innovated this format in recent years. So now in April, to mark the National Day, well, one of the most important days in the Catalan calendar, which is St. George's Day, the 23rd of April, in Catalonia, we have this tradition where on April 23rd, traditionally the men would buy women in their lives, be it their mothers or their partners, a rose, and the women would buy the men a book. In modern times, it's become more diffuse. Everyone just buys everyone roses and books. But it's the most important day for book sales in Catalonia in the whole year. I don't remember the exact percentage, but something like 30% of all book sales in a year happen on that day in Catalonia. So around that, we've built this Sefer Spring Festival. We're going to have a few book presentations, including the presentation of David's latest book, La Lengua Herida. And on the 23rd itself, Mosaica, in collaboration with Thib, one of the Jewish communities in Barcelona, are going to have a stand on one of the main thoroughfares in Barcelona, the Passeig de Gràcia. It's going to be a big stand, 6 meters long. I'm trying not to sound Trumpy, but it's going to be a big stand. And the idea is that on this stand we're going to expose Jewish literature. So this is going to be the stand of Jewish literature on the day of the Book of Catalonia for all to come and see us, which is part of our mission to visibilize the Jewish presence in Barcelona, the Jewish life in Barcelona, to give people the opportunity to interact, engage, and also support. And I might as well add, dovetailing on what you will have heard Olga talk about in the last talk about what is a Jewish book. When we host the Sefer Book Festival, we naturally ask ourselves that question. So, like, what books are we highlighting as Jewish literature? And the criteria we follow is any book written by Jews or any book written about Jews, which makes it quite broad. It serves, as I said, this double purpose of, on the one hand, highlighting and underscoring the fact that there are currently Jews in Barcelona writing in Spanish or in Catalan, as well as those of other countries, but also gives the opportunity to point people who are interested in learning more about the Jewish people, of which there is very little knowledge in Spain still to this day. We can point them in the right direction by pointing them at relevant non-fiction books, history books, essays, and so on. Having said all that, we can now begin the panel. So first we're going to have Valerie.
Thank you very much. Okay. Thank you very much. It's really wonderful to be here. I appreciate very much the invitation and look forward to the next Sefer. And we have had to change a little bit the order of our conversation simply because I have class at 4:30, so I might have to leave before the end, and I'm sorry for that, to not be able to, but I will be back afterwards for dinner. So I wanted to just talk about Granta magazine. I don't know if anyone knows what Granta is. I'm going to first explain what the magazine is, then I will explain how it came to Spanish language, and then the work that we have been doing very, very closely with the Granta in Israel. One of our missions, Granta is called a magazine, but though it's called a magazine, though it's called a magazine, this is actually what it looks like. It comes in the form of a book. And in the British Granta, which is the original Granta, comes out 4 times a year. And they have a subscription base of around 80,000 copies, so it's quite substantial. Then, of course, they sell a lot more than that outside of the subscription. But our kind of rallying cry is what you see here. Our mission is understanding the belief in the power and urgency of the story and its supreme ability to describe illuminate, and make real. And that means stories, whether they're told in fiction or nonfiction. And also the understanding that it's a simple but important point, that literature is about so much more than the act of reading. It has to be a conversation. So for us, Granta magazine, the fact that it comes out every 4 months, it comes out in the format of a monographic where we kind of raise a magnet and then everything starts moving around, and we invite authors we commission writing on a subject, and a lot of things happen. And it provokes a conversation. And it not only provokes a conversation among the writers that are in the issue, but then afterwards with the readers. And it gives us an opportunity to move around a lot and to get into the subjects that are important for us in current events. From many different angles, from the angle of fiction, from the angle of imagination, and from the angle of very long-form reportage, for example, which in the age of false and fake news is more and more important to have a place where you know that things have been checked and very carefully. But we know that times change. It's one of the principal things, times change. Who could have thought 10 years ago that Bob Dylan would win a Nobel Prize, right? And it's still a question of whether he should have or not. But we won't get into that. But the idea is that he did. Literary magazines are those vessels, we could say, where those changing times can be studied in real time. That's their mission, is to take what's happening in the world and giving voice to people who have particularly good grasp of language, to work on kind of reflecting that, no? Literary magazines, here are some other ones, the Paris Review, the New Yorker, Granta. These are probably the 3 most important, most prestigious literary magazines that are today. Also, of course, literary magazines help in many ways because we know the importance of when critics and reviewers are working. A lot of the writers that we have in Granta work in those areas. But just to say very quickly, Granta actually is over 130 years old. It began in the 1880s as Cambridge Student Magazine. It was called The Granta, like Facebook started as The Facebook, and then it became Facebook. Well, Granta started as The Granta, and now it's just Granta. But some of the early writers in Granta, A.A. Milne, I don't know if anybody knows, he wrote Winnie the Pooh, exactly. Believe it or not, we started there. E.M. Forster, and then over the years, Ted Hughes, Sylvia Plath. So these are some of the covers of the Granta throughout the 40s and the 50s and the 60s, until we get to 1979, which is the moment when British Granta, there's a big change. Bill Buford, a young kind of aguerrido, as we say in Spanish, very kind of prickly American editor, came to the UK, and he was unhappy that there weren't any American writers being published in the British establishment, right? So here we are in Cambridge. He comes to Cambridge, he takes over the Cambridge magazine, and the first issue he publishes is called The Death of the British Novel. So that sat very well with the establishment. But shortly thereafter, he started an issue. He started publishing British or American writers, and he came up actually with the term dirty realism. Any reader here who knows American literature knows what dirty realism is. That was coined by Bill Buford for an issue of Granta. But what was important after announcing the death of the British novel, then he did an issue dedicated to the best young writers, best young novelists in the English language. And this is the first selection that they made in 1983, and it includes writers like Martin Amis, Julian Barnes, Ian McEwen, Kazuo Ishiguro, Naipaul, Shiva Naipaul, et cetera, et cetera. So they kind of focused in and found a whole new generation that wasn't able to emerge at a time because the establishment was kind of so stuffy. So Granta also with Salman Rushdie in the very, very beginning. Salman was discovered by this issue of Granta. So here we have, for example, Ian McEwen, Salman Rushdie, and some of the other writers around him. And here's Paul Auster, who's also a very Granta writer, with Bill Buford right next to him, and Sidi Husvet, and Martin Amis, and the Jackal. If anybody knows Andrew Wiley, he's right there, the Jackal. But they were all part of Granta in a very important period of time. At that time, Granta was translating a lot. And that was one of the really important effects of the magazine. Is it was bringing in writers from a lot of different parts of the world, particularly from Eastern Europe, and particularly from Latin America. So here we see some of the issues where Garcia Marquez, and we're talking about the early 80s. I mean, these are not yet, the Nobel boom years. So there's Reinaldo Arenas. An issue was dedicated to Vargas Llosa for president, because in the Anglo world they thought it was so strange that a writer would want to be a president. It just didn't make any sense. Sergio Ramirez, an interview with Christopher Hitchens. So in more or less the year 2000, Aurelio and I started getting very interested in an issue, like thinking that British Granta isn't publishing very many Spanish language writers anymore, and maybe we should be thinking about why that's happening. So we started a conversation with Granta, the Ray Hederman, who is the owner of New York Review of Books, if anybody knows how important New York Review of Books is as an intellectual center. Ray was the owner of Granta, and we approached Ray Hederman with the idea of starting an issue of Granta in Spanish so that we would be able to feed into the British magazine new Spanish writing, which we did. We launched in 2003. Here are some of our first issues. El Silencio en Boca de Todos, which we were gifted, Susan Sontag gifted us a piece to launch this. Cabrera Infante, many very important fundamental writers, Muñoz Molina, Bernardo Achaga, etc. And finally, we figured after 7 years of proving that we were able to do our work properly, and we learned the Granta way. People always say Granta has a certain way. When you read Granta, you know what it is, but it's hard to put your finger on it. And it took us a long time to kind of figure out what is Granta like, no? But when we finally got to 2010, we asked if we could do our first issue of the Best of Young Spanish Language Writers, and which we did. It became, we had a hard time getting coverage in the Spanish language, but internationally, the New York Times, The Guardian, everybody covered it, so the Spanish language press came running, because we had to get it outside first. These are some of the writers. These are some of the following issues of Granta. Dedicated, we went in to see Colombian writing, we went in to see Mexican writing. And slowly but surely, those writers that we selected in our first group started kind of moving up. And here we have Samantha Schweblin, who we discovered in our issue of Granta, who was a finalist for the Booker in 2017. Sigrid Rausing, who's a philanthropist and a very, very important person, who donates hundreds of millions of pounds yearly to different places like Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, a lot of different places, specifically things having to do with women's issues. Sigrid took over Granta, and so she had the idea of really working now the idea of the Granta model in Spanish in other languages. These are a couple of the things that we've done together with now under her auspices and with other writers, very big international writers like John Maxwell Coetzee, for example, who's one of the people that is very close to Granta, who have helped us with a lot of these issues. No sé por qué no me... No sé por qué no me va. We're on our way to the important, the juicy part.
Oh my God, what happened?
The juicy
So the
images.
computer crashed, basically. That's right, sorry.
Yes, because this is where I want to talk about Mira. Okay.
Oh my God, no, we don't want notificar, no. I'm so sorry for this.
Oh, that's okay.
Looks like
So
we're
now it's-
starting. Here.
A little bit more. Yeah, right here. This one.
Looks like there's a problem on it.
Ah,
I'm sorry.
oh dear.
No, this is giving some kind of problem, this concrete. Can you do it without it?
I have to get I need the names. I'll just look at it from here.
I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. Oh, you just don't get a chance to see all of the work that we've done with in Israel. Okay, so I'll just do. Yeah. Okay. So after all of this that we were talking about, and after our Best of Young issues, we came to our second Best of Young Spanish language novelists issue, which David Aliaga was one of the selected authors there, very much because he was giving us news from a place that we hadn't had the chance to read as much, which was a young author exploring issues of Jewish identity in Spain. And he's an excellent writer. It's not because he's here. We selected him. But we felt that what he had to offer was new news, and something that was being explored in a way that hadn't been explored before. And I was going to show them the Guadalajara. We have a photograph now of all of the young writers together. But, so Granta International, very, very quickly. We have been working since probably about 2012. Mira Rashti, I don't know if anyone knows Sipar Pashut in Tel Aviv. Excellent bookstore. And Mira Rashti is one of the managers of the store. They decided to launch Granta, an Israeli issue of Granta in Hebrew. And I have some beautiful pictures of Mira talking about Granta, and I have some, which maybe later we can share them with you, some of the issues, the copies that they have done. A very special issue that we did together with Hebrew Granta and Spanish Granta, with some of the Spanish writers that they published in Israel. We did a series of events around this, talking about how we're working together between the languages and the exchange of authors. I wanted to show you some of the sponsors that we had for that issue there, and the fact that we started working on promoting together, putting together some of these Spanish writers together with Israeli writers. To get them together to talk to each other, and and panels and explore different ways of writing in the different languages and communities. We started in 2015, and we had a very special day in Mishkano Shahananim, a short story seminar, which was very widely attended. And in Sipur Pashut, they have done a series of events around the Jerusalem Book Fair with Granta. The two Grantas get together. We do events in the Jerusalem Book Fair where we share our stories with each other through translation. In the Jerusalem Book Fair, we had a very, very big event in 2018, for example, where we had some of British Granta beaming in a very large conversation. And we started publishing authors like Tahila Hakimi, for example. And not only by publishing Tahila in Spanish, we also are discovering the translators from Hebrew into Spanish. So we've been growing kind of that community of the different translators and the different writers and sharing them. Now, Tahila, after we published her in Granta in Spanish, we also were able to get her to a residency, very, very famous and select residency in the Malba Museum in Buenos Aires, where she went and she spent 4 months there as a resident. We have published Roy Chiki Arad, we've published Liran Golod, and we've published Nir Baram, for example. And Nir, what he wrote for Spanish Granta, we were able to translate to English and publish in the New Yorker. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that through the work that we do with Hebrew Granta, we are able to get knowledge of young and not only, but Spanish writing, and we're able to learn more about what's happening. They're so active, they do so much outreach, and they do a lot of really interesting things also with artist communities, theater groups there in Tel Aviv, and they have an international network of booksellers around the Mediterranean that they work with. And I think these kind of things like with Sefer, and it's very, very important, the type of work that we can do to help through a vehicle like Granta, which is what we are using to bring the writers together and to get them opportunities, especially through some of the projects that we are doing. We're also able to get them into residencies here in Spain. David has come to a residency up in Catalunya, close to the Gavarras. And also with David, for example, we have been able to tour throughout the United States. We did a tour from New York to, where did we go? New York, Minneapolis, Dallas, Houston, exactly, and San Francisco. Not bad. So anyway, just saying that through Granta, that vehicle of putting together writers who write in Hebrew or who write about Jewish identity or Jewish issues, there's a lot of room for that in the world. Thank you.
Maybe at the end.
We'll take questions at the end. Oh, but she's got to go.
Oh, yeah.
Vale.
So,
venga.
Como tienes que marcharte, querrían hacerte una pregunta.
Oh, sí.
I have a question. You've been talking. One of the things that we talk about here in culture is the past, the present, the future. So when you were talking about the Granta in Israel and the Granta in Spain, the first thing that came to my mind is Ladino, because this is absolutely the combination of both languages. Working in the library in Izmir, rescuing a library in Izmir, one of the things that we discovered we have in the library a big box with a lot of romances in Ladino. And these are old writers, some of them we don't even know who they are, but they have beautiful little stories written in Ladino. And my question is there any place, we're talking about the past here, not the future, and I know that you try to promote the young writers, but is there a place in the Granta to bring together these two languages that are so important for us, the Jewish people, the Hebrew and the Ladino, and put some of those stories maybe out there and give some stage for those writers of the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century. Some of the stories are fascinating and some funny even, but it's nice to see the mixture of Hebrew and Spanish in one literary story.
Yes, certainly, there's room for that. We like to work in archives. We do go do that kind of work to search out archives, to search out old texts, things that have never been discovered, and give them, or that have been discovered so long ago that there's no record of it online. But we have a website. It's granta.com.es, and we do have actually a text there translated from Ladino by Berta Ares. So we have done it before, and we would certainly do, and also, David does a lot of work with the web, also editing texts in the web. So we would always be open to suggestions if there are texts that are interesting, and it can be in Ladino. That's beautiful. I mean, it's obvious why that would be something interesting for us. And and so it's just, if you look on the website, all of the information is there.
I will, thank you.
Hi there. I had a question that's probably very topical. Is that, are you affected by the BD, the boycott Israel stuff with your cooperation? And also, do you try to be non-political with your articles for Israeli politics?
Yes, you can't avoid the situation. I mean, it is what it is. But I don't fall to that kind of pressure. For me, good writing, we need to tell our stories to each other. That's why Granta is there, understanding that the story is the best way that we can understand each other. And I believe very strongly in keeping that space available and open. And if other people, I always say, if you don't want to read it, don't read it. That's anybody's question. But I am going to continue making sure that this space has the stories of people from all over the world.
Do you approach Spanish writers who said, I want to read?
No, I haven't. Yes, I have not. Now, it could be because Granta is an object of desire for a lot of writers. So we're lucky that, maybe the idea of calculating comes into play. I don't know, but luckily, no. I have never had anyone, despite how much, because for me, Mira and the Israeli Granta is my partner. I mean, Granta has 15 international editions, but we're the ones that work together the most, and with the British Granta. And so far, I have not had any pressure anywhere.
So, just before giving my speech about contemporary Jewish literature in Spanish, I just want to say that there is a small publishing house in Spanish called Tirocino, which is specialized in publishing Ladino books. They publish all pieces from newspapers in Ladino published in Sofia or in Turkey or in Salonika. So if you are interested, it's like a very rare thing in the publishing market in Spain, but they made a really interesting work. So if you are interested in Ladino, they have a small catalog offering something, short stories to canticas and so on. So yeah, I think it could be interesting for you. Well, as Valerie has been speaking about, I understand that literature, it's a place for conversation, and also writing is to, as Borges said, maintain a conversation with your readers, with other authors from the past, from the same time. And it was maybe the first time I started to think about the question of Jewish literature written in Spanish was during that Granta tour through the United States. We made a conversation on a bookstore in Dallas, in Wild Detectives, and one of the readers asked me about my influences, that authors that I was in conversation with when I wrote my literature, and I started to mention lots of Jewish authors, but none of them in Spanish language. So when we finished the conversation with the readers, that girl approached to me and asked me, "You are a Spanish writer, you write in Spanish, why you didn't mention any Spanish writers?" And for sure the reason is that as soon as my fiction is concerned by Jewish identity and I am trying to explore through fiction what it means to be a Jewish man in Barcelona in the 21st century, my references were like authors in French like Patrick Modiano, or of course the North American authors like, I don't know, Cynthia Ozick, Philip Roth, Nicole Krauss, and so on. But I felt a bit ashamed of, didn't know the tradition of Spanish literature, or at least not the tradition, but what the Jewish authors in the contemporary times were doing or were writing. So I started to like make a kind of map of contemporary Jewish authors in Spanish language. The first thing, of course, was asking some friends like Valerie or Aurelio. For example, I remember that Aurelio was the first person who spoke me about Angelina Muñiz Haberman, an editor, a Mexican editor in Barcelona. Eduardo Ruiz Sosa put me on the trace of Esther Seligson, with this really, really interesting Jewish Mexican author, and in which, in her text, the Jewish tradition and the Kabbalah has a profound imprint. So then I started to travel around Latin America, and I made questions to other colleagues there in the bookstores. I tried to speak with the people there, and what I found is that, or I didn't expect that, but of course makes sense, that most of recommendations I received were from Jewish women writing in Spanish, and I felt that it was like indicia, and a symptom that something was changing on the canon too, at least on the Jewish canon in Spanish language. Because when I went to Chile and I went to a bookstore, they mentioned me, not any men writing, just Cynthia Rimsky, which, if you don't know, it's very interesting because he hardly rejects that she is a Jewish author and that she is Jewish, but she felt all the weight of the Jewish tradition of her family. So in her works, you can find that struggle with Jewish past, with Jewish families, and trying to reject because she don't want to be that, or she doesn't feel that she's Jewish. So I found it quite interesting. Then I went to Uruguay when another of that Granta Jewish authors, Granta young authors, Gonzalo Vaz, we have been together for some time in Montevideo, and I asked him to recommend me Jewish Uruguayan authors, and again, he mentioned only women. For example, Alicia Migdal. I don't know if you know her. She has been apart from literature for many years, but on the recent times she started to publish again, and it was such a thing to discover what Alicia writes and how she feels addressed by the Jewish question. She has some novels on that topic, but for example, El Mar desde la Orilla. It's a very compelling text. I don't know, maybe you don't know Alicia Migdal, but I'm sure you have heard of Annie Ernaux, the French writer, the Nobel Prize. Alicia Migdal sounds very similar to Annie Ernaux in her capacity to eviscerate herself through writing, and she made this kind of books struggling with Jewish identity too. So we can speak a bit more about other authors, like in Chile too, Andrea Heftanovich, which is Jewish but also from Serbian ascent. She really has like an identitarian conflict. It's difficult for her to explain who she is, and she has tried to do that also through fiction and through writing, so it's very interesting to read her also. So this was a thing for me to discover that, of course, when we think in the Jewish fiction canon, especially in the United States, we mainly think in men, because, you know, Saul Bellow, Malamud, Valand, and from time to time you hear her speak of Cynthia Ozick, but most of them are men. And it was a big surprise, and I found that in this very moment of the history, Jewish women authors in Spanish language are doing such a great job. They are writing very interesting novels and short stories. So I am still on the work of making that atlas of Spanish Jewish literature. Just published some months ago a first article in Cuadernos Hispanoamericanos, which is another really nice literature magazine in Spanish, which is called The Hairs, like first notes for that map of Jewish Spanish literature. And I would like to make some conversation. Maybe when we end the session, you can recommend me if you have heard of any authors in Spanish, but for sure also in languages that are not that don't have that long Jewish literature tradition, because it's easy to find authors in French, in German for sure. We have Kafka, Zweig, all the authors from Vienna, but it's not as easy in some other languages. So it will be nice if you could bring recommendations when we finish. So,
Okay, so what we're trying to do here, all four of us, is we're trying to paint you a picture of what the Jewish literary scene looks like in the Spanish language right now. So to complement what the two other panelists have said so far, my job now is to talk a bit about the presence of Israeli authors in the Spanish market, that is, translations of Israeli books into Spanish language. Now, so you know a bit where I'm coming from. I myself, for the last year, have started getting involved in the world of Hebrew literary translation. I mostly translate Hebrew into Catalan, which is a lot more niche than Spanish, but we can get into that in a sec, though I have also worked in Spanish. Now, the most notable thing about translations of Israeli literature into Spanish is how small it is relatively to the amount of people who speak and read Spanish in the world. So Spanish is one of the most spoken languages in the world, and if you compare the number of Israeli authors translated into Spanish and then bought by the Spanish public, it's not even a quarter of the numbers of these same translations into, say, German, for example, which by global standards is a much smaller language. So, and when I say Spanish-speaking world, I'm talking the Spanish-speaking world. I'm not saying just Spain, I'm including all of Latin America. And we have a divide also in the world of translation, because in Spain we like to translate things into our own continental Old World Spanish, and in Latin America they tend to translate by default. I think it's normally the Mexican variant, sometimes also Argentinian, even though we're perfectly mutually intelligible. We can read each other and understand each other just fine, but that adds to the, let's say, the difficulty, because often authors will be translated twice, so to speak, as has been the case with Edgar Queret, just to name an example. He's got his Mexican translations and his Spanish translations. So, why is this? Is very hard to say. I can't say that there's been any solid research into the matter, because I see it as a field brimming with potential, not least because Hebrew is such a rich and interesting and challenging language to translate. It is a highly polysemic language, meaning compared to other languages, it's rather poor in vocabulary, as in the total number of words, but with fewer words, they can carry a lot more meaning. When you read a text in Hebrew, the Hebrew language allows your mind to go on this short walk around all the possible meanings this word could convey before you land on the right one and move on. Whereas when we translate into English, Spanish, and so on, we have a rich array of synonyms from which we can choose how to translate this one word. So that means that the world of Hebrew translation into Spanish is potentially very rich and brimming with potential, because every translator is going to translate the text in a completely different way. This happens anyway, but coming from Hebrew, I don't know. I'm just excited to see it finally happen. Most of the Israeli authors that you would find in Spain are what I will call the classic Israeli authors. It's funny to talk of classics, because they were writing or publishing 40, 50 years ago, but it's a literature of a short history. I dare say most Spaniards will have heard of Amos Oz, David Grossman, and Queret. Yeah, Queret is quite popular in Spain. And that's kind of it. You're saying a name here? Well, that's the thing. Aleph Bet Yoshua is not that translated, which is very frustrating, because he's very good. He's very, very good. And I personally think he's better than Amos Oz and David Grossman, but that's me. Yeah. And anyway, only a handful of his novels have been translated into Spanish. And these color the vision of what Spaniards have of Israeli literature. Notably, most Israeli authors in Spanish translation are what in Israeli political terms we'd call left-wing, but this is not so much an editorial choice as an Israeli literary phenomenon. Most Israeli authors tend to be left-wing for reasons I'm not really qualified to elaborate on. It just seems to be the way it is. There's a gap in the market for right-wing literature in Israel, so come on. And then, if we look at recent years, also I might as well quickly point out the number of translators. Hebrew to Spanish translators working in the literary field are not that many. I've not been able to count, an accurate figure, but based on my research and experience, it doesn't look like we're talking about more than 20 in the world. And again, I'm talking Spanish-speaking world. In Spain, we're probably not even talking about 10. In the case of Catalan, it's even less. I mean, Hebrew-Catalan is a very niche combination. There's 3 or 4 active translators working right now in this combo. This also leads to certain bottlenecking, I think, in the production of these books, a certain level of gatekeeping, because it's hard to publishing houses don't often like to take risks, and translating a book from rare language like Hebrew is expensive. It's an expensive undertaking, and it's not going to give you a lot of sales at the end of the day. So you want to minimize risks, and again, there's few people qualified to do it. It ends up in the same names being recycled over and over again. It's hard to break into the cycle. So this, I don't think this is like the main reason why we don't see more of it, but it's certainly a factor. And if we look more at modern times, like the gentleman was asking about BDS, for example, naturally this is a question that's come up a lot since October 7th, and I've been able to experiment it with the literary translations I've worked on. Not boycotting per se. I feel like even though the cultural boycott is a thing and online circulate plenty of spreadsheets with names of authors tagged as, you know, Zionist or Zionist, I don't know, like people who have not stated their opinion openly. These are also not desirable to the BDS movement. So there is a lot of finger pointing and naming, but I don't know that this affects sales because most Spanish readers of Israeli literature, I think, are just looking for a good story. They're not so much looking to read Israeli authors to learn about Israel. That feels more like a happy accident of reading Israeli literature, that you get to see a new country from within. It's actually something I try to do through my own translations. Often some translations will localize the content, you know, erase any references to Israeli culture and replace them with Spanish or American cultural reference. I try to keep everything very Israeli and add footnotes where necessary to give people a chance to get to know what that country is like from within. I'm going to try to wrap up. So the BDS, more than sales and more than boycotting like book presentations, which again, it's not really a thing, at least not here in Spain. I can't speak for other countries. What I have noticed is that it creates a greater reticence in editors to deal with Israeli authors. They think twice before doing it, and that in itself is a shame. Because within the Spanish literary world, there is a lot of interest and love for Jewish and Israeli literature. On average, it's quite overwhelming. And now you find people, like rearranging their publishing schedules or canceling projects because of the fear of potential repercussions that then never materialize. So that's my analysis so far that I wanted to share with you. Now I'll pass the mic to Aurelio.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you all for welcoming me here to Sefer. Thank you, David. Thank you, Paul. What is this half Mexican, half Canadian, living in Barcelona for so many years, interested in translating in fully steeped not only from the assimilated Jews as Susan Sontag or William Weinberger would be, but religious ones as Peter Cole, which I will mention in a second. It beats me. I don't have any idea. In one of her most celebrated compositions, the poem of the End, poet Marina Tsvetaeva, who claimed that the heart is a musical organ rather than a physical one, famously wrote years before she was crushed by the Soviet state that ghetto of God's chosen, a divide and a ditch, expect no mercy. In this most Christian of worlds, all poets are Jews. It could be said and even argued that perhaps only a non-Jew would write something like that in a love poem. But it was another Russian, Joseph Brodsky, who was Jewish, and writes in one of his best essays that Tsvetaeva stands all alone in that tradition and is the most passionate Russian voice of the 20th century Russia. Poetry is not the best words in the best order, for language is the highest form of existence, Brodsky argues. Poetry is language negating its own mass and the laws of gravity. It is languages striving upward to that beginning where the Word, in capital W, was. Poetry is the true augmented reality, I would say, the real metaverse. That's something more than we are looking for at critical times like the ones we are living and are immersed today. All authentic, true poems challenge us here and now. And it is with this qualifier, which was an assumption a century ago, that Tsvetayeva's line speaks to us today. In the face of the simple and infantile dichotomy of the idea versus the tank, or the lazy and dangerous idea that the illuminating archives of the past alone are enough for us to understand and act upon the urgencies of our present reality, the poem is a centripetal force that gathers reality's deepest meanings. In the face of the coalition of the forces of violence, authoritarianism, and greed that hover over us right now as they hijack our attention, the poem is a field of force and persistence, a microcosm of consciousness holding its ground in its own margin that withdraws and then expands again. It is like a stick of dynamite, with the difference that it blows up slowly. That is precisely why I dedicated several years to translate Peter Cole's monumental Poetry of Kabbalah into Spanish, and then strove to have it not only published by means of grants, but promoted and reviewed. All these efforts concluded last week precisely here in Barcelona, by way of Monterrey in Mexico City, and Madrid before that, in the context of a spiritual, literary, and moral debt that Paul and David have alluded to. The debt that Spanish literary cultures owe to Jewish culture. This anthology offers a substantial compilation of poetry that emerges directly from Jewish mysticism. Following Gershom Scholem's suggestion to penetrate the tremendous poetic potential of the Kabbalistic tradition, Peter Cole presents compositions written on three continents over a period of 1,500 years. Not only in the direct, strictly historical development, as he includes hymns and poems that precede and reach into the 21st century. As well as translating the poems, Peter Cole introduces each of the sections of the book with comments on the periods and their authors, from Yanai to Ibn Gabirol, from Halevi to Luria, from the Zohar to the Book of Creation. The anthology concludes with a notes section that covers all aspects and references of this tradition that spans from well-known hymns such as Lejado Di to mysterious incantations describing the ascent to heaven, revealing a Judaism full of eroticism within the religion itself. Let us not forget that tradition is also one of the meanings of Kabbalah. One of the peculiar features of the Kabbalists is their metaphysically positive attitude towards language, considered as an instrument of the divine. Or to put it in other words, those by Juan Ramón Jiménez, another Nobel Prize, the poet, strictly speaking, can only write since his world, the ineffable, condemns him to the word. I must say that in the last presentation of Poetry of Kabbalah here in Barcelona just a week ago, the room, the La Librería La Central, the Central bookstore, was packed. There was people were left outside and could not even enter the presentation itself. And it is essential to remember here, right now, that one of the fundamental currents of Kabbalah developed precisely nearby Girona, an hour away from train. That the Zohar was written by Moshe de Leon, among others, and that some of the great poets and thinkers included in Peter Cole's anthology, such as Nachmanides, Ibn Gabirol, Yehuda Halevi, or Abraham Abulafia, lived and wrote in Spain, and that the influence of their work can be traced in others of a very different nature, from Ramón Llull in the Middle Ages, and Pico de la Mirandola in the Renaissance, to the permutations of the poetic avant-gardes of the beginning of the last century until very recently in the work, for example, of Spanish language writers like Borges or poets like José Ángel Valente or Juan Gelman. Argentine Hellman, recipient of the Cervantes Prize, along with Mexican Gloria Gervitz, who left us recently, and Cuban-American José Coser, who has just published the remarkable collection Convergencias at age 85, are three exceptional Spanish-language Jewish poets of very different political persuasion and style, whose work has been circulating in Spain in recent years, among several others, in an otherwise healthy and even prolific, if very marginal, poetry scene. All three have been translated into English as well. In our present day, real poetry dwells in the catacombs and comes to console us in times of need like this one, when words are precisely distorted by deliberately disorienting forces. Poetry is an irrevocable utterance and cannot be glossed. Again, poetry is an irrevocable utterance and cannot be glossed. So let us allow the poems to speak for themselves. And I could mention other poets as well, from Daniel Samoilovich to Miriam Moscona, who writes precisely in Judeo-Español, in Españolico. In her long work in progress, Migrations, Migraciones, Gloria Gervitz wrote, "Dream the dream of life is beautiful, my child. The candle's glow grows rusty, and where am I? I'm who I always was, the surprise of being. I come to where everything starts, the beginning of the beginning. This is the time for waking up. My grandmother lights the Shabbos candles for her death and looks at me. Shabbat lengthens into never, into after, into before. My grandmother who died of dreams endlessly rocks the dream that invents her, which I invent. A wild girl looks at me from inside. I am whole." And Juan Gelman, who wrote this poem originally in Ladino, says, "How lovely your eyes, and more so the gaze of your eyes, and more so the air of your eyes when you gaze into the distance. In the air I was searching for, the lamp of your blood, blood of your shadow over my heart." And finally, José Coser, in Spanish, in one of his recent Convergencias. This is not translated into English, but I'll allow myself to read it into Spanish. Convergencia. Un batiburrillo por donde atajo, quita y pon, desgaja, lo que quitas a dónde va, a parar, lo que pones en, cuanto toca papel, hora perjurado, hora de seda, se refugia en un recodo de la escena, poema o dibujo, no tiene anatomía. Vivo pendiente, de repente surgen mecáchisis. En mi suerte, nubes de polvo, me empobrezco viendo cómo enriquecer lo que carece de riqueza. Un eros de papel, una superficie lisa donde eco y yo nos tumbamos de espaldas a reencontrarnos, no nos rozamos nunca, como el agua no consigue tocar al agua que corre en dirección contraria al menor roce. El cuerpo de vejez se presta en verdad a la verdad más verdadera, no tanto como juguete de la muerte, sino jugarreta, más bien mezcolanza tras un arbitrio de Dios, azufre, cobre. So, as you heard, Tsvetaeva was right. All poets are Jews. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Aurelio, David, Paul. It's been a very, very interesting panel. I want to just say one word, that it is not only interesting because of the content, but also because of the form, I will say. We're all organizers of activities, so when we think about organizing a panel for talking about literature like this one, maybe the first thing that comes to our mind is, okay, we're going to invite authors. But here we can see much more than authors. We see translators, we see editors, we see critics. There's a variety of people that can talk about literature, and this also wanted to be an example of of a different way of organizing a panel on literature. Let's open a very short round of questions if anybody wants to interact a little bit. One? No? Not? Okay, I'm very short one. I will do one, which is actually a little bit about I would like to ask about this backstage of organizing a panel like that. I don't know if you could say some words about some tips, some best practices for our organizers when they will have to organize a panel on literature. What they should look for.
That's for you, Paul.
It's a very difficult question because panel discussions are generally unbearable. It's I suppose that's challenge number one. Like, how do you make it interesting? And I think the key, as Fede has already alluded to in his introduction, is to have panel members who perhaps are in and of themselves interesting and entertaining to listen to, as opposed to maybe people who would be more obvious or relevant, because at the end of the day, what you want is both to teach and to engage. So that goes through personality. That's all that comes to mind right now. And with that, I'm not like saying like, you know, thank God you've got me.
Thank you, Paul. We have one more question here.
Hey, I wanted to ask, I think this is a continuation of the previous question. How do you speak about literature? Because it's inevitable that we're going to have to speak about literature in having chosen this topic. How do you speak about literature to a public that hasn't read the literature? I mean, I assume that there are many people like you and me, Paul, who, you know, try to inch into the space, but most of our public will not have read Jewish literature. You know, so any tips?
Well, I was maybe unsuccessfully, but I was trying to precisely give an example right now by reading the literature itself. If you read the poems themselves, it's a way of actually engaging you in what poetry can do. And since poetry is very condensed language in the least amount of space, with the words charges at the maximum, you can't gloss it, because if you want to say what the poem says, you just need to read the poem again. So this is a way of actually engaging for people who do not know the writers themselves. And so sometimes that's why, for example, in the UK, in the US, where there is a tradition of actually what you call readings, people actually will read the short stories or parts of a novel, and that allows for people to engage with the work directly.
So thank you very, very much to the three of you. Thanks also to Valerie, that she had to left, but she will be returning. It's great that we finish with talking about poetry, because I'm happy to inform you that at the end of today's evening we are having an open mic of poetry, so you can start looking for some poems in your local languages. We would love to hear a big variety of poetry. You don't need to be a poet to read poetry. We will also have some professional poets coming here and presenting their works. We're looking very much forward for your things.
Could you put the image precisely of the
Oh,
book that I
your
was
image,
talking about?
sorry.
Because it might be an interesting thing for you to know. If you don't know it if you don't read Spanish, but you do read English. This book, Poetry of Kabbalah, which I was referring to, was published by Yale in 2012, and is a key work.
Maybe take the microphone.
Sorry if I wasn't clear. This book was published in 2012 in Yale University. Peter Cole is one of the great Hebraists in the English language, and this was the book that I was referring about that we actually published, promoted here in Barcelona and in Spain a few days ago, with Peter himself present. So, that was all.
Thank you very much,